Welcome to the Joseph Smith's Polygamy, the Lucy Walker Affair video. Okay, first slide here is from the diary of Helen Kimball. She was a 14-year-old wife of the prophet Joseph Smith. She's pictured above. On the left picture here is in, I guess it looks like she's in her middle ages or a little bit older. And then through some kind of software manipulation, it shows what she might have looked like when she was 14. She was Joseph Smith's youngest wife. She was also a good friend of Lucy Walker in the Utah period. So in her diary on November 16, 1886, she talks about, this lady in the temple talks about these two, Lucy Walker and Helen Kimball, being the wives of a god, and that god was the prophet Joseph Smith. He had died, was martyred, went up into the spirit world or heaven, and is now a god. And someday these these two wives would be his goddesses. So they were told that in a washing and anointing ordinance in the temple by this lady named Sister Clark, and a number of things she also said by the power of the Spirit. Okay, a few more preliminary slides or statements before we get to Lucy Walker's story, which she tells in the first person. This is from the Mormon apologist Patrick Mason in a book that is for the general masses, What is Mormonism? A Student's Introduction, which came out in 2017, about 4 years ago, through Routledge Press. Says something pretty honest that I like here. Patrick Mason says, critics have usually reduced Mormon polygamy to nothing more nor less than rapacious sexual desire gratified through the abuse of excessive power. Sex and power must certainly be accounted for and may in the end be the best and simplest explanation. So you may have heard of Occam's razor. The most simple explanation is probably the right explanation. But of course, he goes on to do a bunch of apologetics after this statement. So, but I like this statement from the Mormon apologist Patrick Mason, pictured on the left here, cover of this book on the right. All right, a counterpoint to Mason's comment is by another Mormon apologist, Michael R. Ash. He wrote a book entitled Shaken Faith Syndrome, Strengthening One's Testimony in the Face of Criticism and Doubt. So it's a book for doubting Mormons. How to handle critics like me, I guess. Chapter 22 in the book is on plural marriage. This came out under the Fair Mormon Press, which is the main apologetic group for the church. So in here he says, LDS men were not debased adulterers who were out to satisfy their carnal lusts, and LDS women were not mindless sheep who simply submitted to every request of the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith. So which of these statements is right? The previous slide or this slide? Were LDS men, including Joseph Smith, debased adulterers out to satisfy their carnal lusts, and were LDS women mindless sheep? So we're going to study Lucy Walker in depth, an in-depth analysis, and try to answer this as one of the major questions. All right, so let's get to a little bit of Lucy Walker's biography. She's pictured above here. This is basically a blown-up picture of her face from the cover art of this video. Looks like this picture is maybe in her 30s or 40s. It's basically the only picture we have of her that I know of. Lucy Walker was born on April 30, 1826 in Peacham, Vermont. I think Joseph Smith was also born in Vermont. She was the fourth of 10 children. And I got some of this information on these slides from Brian Hale's site, josephsmithspolygamy.org, the Lucy Walker section. Okay, so Lucy's parents joined the church and brought many of their kids into the church with them. But Lucy's mother died on January 15, 1842. This was before she married Joseph Smith. At this time, her youngest child was only 2 years old. So got a 2-year-old, and then we got 9 older children. Lucy's father also had health problems, so tough time for Lucy. This is a picture above of what she may have looked like when she was like 15 or 16, but it's not an actual picture of her. All right, so let's get to the main statement here from Lucy Walker. This can be found in the Church History Library under a number of different call numbers. There's a lot of different copies of it. It was also showed up in a book, which I'll mention a little bit later. I believe this was in the late 1880s when she gave this statement or account. Joseph Smith told Lucy's family that you have just such a family as I could love. My house shall be their house. I will adopt them as my own, place the little ones with some kind friends, and the 4 eldest shall come to my house and be received and treated as my own children. So the 4 eldest were to come and live with Joseph Smith at his house. Lucy was one of those 4. All the little ones would be placed with different friends because her mother is dead, father is pretty sick, and Joseph Smith actually sends the father on a mission, which we'll get to on another slide. So basically, Lucy becomes part of Joseph Smith's family, and Joseph Smith even admits this, saying that Lucy would be treated as her own child, as Joseph Smith's own child. All right, so her statement continues. The prophet Joseph Smith and his wife Emma introduced us as their own daughters. Every privilege was accorded us in the home. Every privilege within reach was ours. So that's interesting. Both Joseph Smith and his wife Emma introduced Lucy as their own daughter. All right, a statement again from Brian Hales. It appears that Lucy Walker was one of the first women to learn of the restoration of plural marriage from the prophet. She wasn't one of his first wives, but I guess she was one of the first ones to learn about plural marriage, according to Brian Hales. This is some Mormon guy. I'm not even sure what year this is, but he's sitting here with 3 of his wives. They look like oldest to youngest here. Okay, Hales continues here. Since Lucy's father was away on a mission, the prophet Joseph Smith approached her brother, William Holmes Walker, before proposing to her. So the prophet had made good friends with Lucy's brother, William Walker. They would go riding together. The prophet would have William do things for him. And William kind of got under his charisma and under his power. Of course, he's a member of the church. He's only 22 years old, and he basically says, well, it's okay with me if you marry her, but Lucy's going to have to make up her own mind. Now, notice here, the prophet Joseph Smith is not asking the father. He's asking this 22-year-old brother that he's kind of made friends with here. I think he's plotting and planning, laying all this in a line, which Joseph Smith was very good at. So it's interesting to see how Hales phrases this. He says, since Lucy's father was away on a mission, well, why is he on a mission? His wife is dead. He's got these 10 kids that he needs to be taken care of, but he's sent away on this mission. Doesn't he need to be home? Doesn't he need to be dealing with all these kids? So why is he on this mission? Joseph Smith kind of made up this story that because of the father's health, he was in ill health. Joseph Smith told him, well, if you go to a different location, maybe it will be better for your health. That's basically what he told the father, That's probably BS in my mind. And it's probably Joseph Smith that is sending the father away on this mission. Okay, so Todd Compton talks about this in his book, In Sacred Loneliness, which came out in 1997. One of the best books on polygamy, in my opinion. He says, Catherine's daughter wrote, and Catherine was Lucy's older sister. She wrote that Lydia Walker, who was Lucy's mother, died in 1842, and mother and her sisters and brothers were taken to the home of the prophet Joseph Smith and raised as his own. This is what Lucy's older sister is saying. So it's basically one of Joseph Smith's own children, kind of like a foster daughter. Mother's father, who was Lucy's dad, was meanwhile sent east on 2 missions. So the father was sent east on 2 missions. Interesting. So I think he was gone for at least 2 years and maybe longer. This gives Joseph Smith a window of time to work in. All right, we have another account from Lucy Walker in an affidavit dated December 17, 1902. So this affidavit and the other statement is coming long after the fact. She was married to Joseph in 1843. But anyway, in this affidavit, she says, when the prophet Joseph Smith first mentioned the principle of plural marriage to me, I felt indignant. She was angry, and so expressed myself to him, because my feelings and education were averse to anything of that nature. So when he first proposed, Lucy was not happy. She was angry and was averse to it. Of course, you know, they had puritanical Christian teachings that they grew up with. All right, Lucy continues in the same affidavit. But Joseph Smith assured me that this doctrine had been revealed to him of the Lord, and that I was entitled to receive a testimony of its divine origin for myself. So that was the idea of Joseph Smith, you know, telling her, you can receive your own testimony of what I've been telling you, and what I'm telling you is of God. Pictured above here, we see some of the wives of Joseph Smith. He had a lot more. He had probably 35 to 40. You can see Lucy Walker is pictured here. You can see Helen Mar Kimball pictured here, who we've already talked about a little bit. All right, so Joseph Smith told Lucy that she should pray about it, and eventually she did receive an answer to her prayer, and she got a testimony of plural marriage. So this is from the same affidavit. Joseph Smith counseled me to pray to the Lord, which I did, and thereupon revived from him a powerful and irresistible testimony of the truthfulness and divinity of plural marriage, which testimony has abided with me ever since. So remember, she's remembering this a long time later. She got married in 1843. This statement's being given in 1902. But it sounds like Joseph Smith told her to pray. She got an answer to this prayer, a powerful and irresistible testimony, which she has had ever since, because later on she became the plural wife of Heber C. Kimball and was a plural wife until he died. Okay, going back to Lucy Walker's main account. As I mentioned, this account can be found in the Church History Library. They have a number of different copies of it. But it was also found, could be found in Lyman Omer Littlefield's book entitled Reminiscences of Latter-day Saints, which came out in 1888. So that's probably around the time period of this statement, around 1888. In the year 1842, when Lucy was 15 or 16 years old, I put that in there. So this is how old she was when Joseph Smith was approaching her. She was 15 or 16. Not sure exactly which age. Todd Compton just says it was either 15 or 16. So in the year 1842, President Joseph Smith sought an interview with me, that's with Lucy Walker, and said, I have a message for you. That's what Joseph Smith says. I have been commanded of God to take another wife, and you are the woman. Lucy said, my astonishment knew no bounds. This announcement was indeed a thunderbolt to me. All right, so Richard Bushman talks about this in his book, Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling. Bushman says, in 1842, when Lucy was 15 or 16, Joseph told her the following. So Compton mentions it, Bushman mentions it. Lucy was either 15 or 16 when Joseph Smith is approaching her to be married. Okay, so Bushman says, in 1842, when Lucy was 15 or 16, Joseph Smith told her, I have a message for you. I have been commanded of God to take another wife, and you are the woman. Kind of repeating what was on the other slide. And this is the cover of Bushman's book, and a picture of Bushman here. It's a partly true book and partly apologetic. Probably more true than apologetic. All right, same account here. Joseph Smith asked me if I believed him to be a prophet of God. Most assuredly I do, I replied. He fully explained to me the principle of plural or celestial marriage. So there's a severe power imbalance here. One is a prophet of God who speaks for God, and you got this 15 or 16-year-old girl that believes in this religion and believes in this prophet. So big power imbalance, undue influence, you could call it. All right, same account here from the book, Reminiscences of Latter-day Saints, 1888. He, Joseph Smith, said this principle was again to be restored for the benefit of the human family, that it would prove an everlasting blessing to my father's house, and form a chain that could never be broken, worlds without end. So what was this everlasting blessing to her father's house? Is he talking about salvation here for her and her family? Her father's house, right? That's her family. To form a chain that can never be broken, worlds without end. All right, we're going to get to some interpretations of what this means. All right, so here's what Todd Compton thinks that this means in his book, In Sacred Loneliness. Again, as in the case of Helen Marr and Sarah Ann Whitney, so all three of these, Lucy Walker, Helen Marr, and Sarah Ann Whitney, Joseph Smith put the burden of a family salvation on a teenager's willingness to accept him as a plural husband. So that's what Compton thinks it means. Joseph Smith is putting the burden of a whole family salvation on a teenager's willingness to marry him. This 15 or 16-year-old, it's up to her to accept this holy principle, and it'll prove to be this great blessing of salvation for her and her whole family. Okay, so her account continues. I thought I prayed sincerely, but was so unwilling to consider the matter favorably that I fear I did not ask in faith for light. Gross darkness instead of light took possession of my mind. I was tempted and tortured beyond endurance until life was not desirable. So, was she thinking of suicide here? She was tempted and tortured beyond endurance until life was not desirable. She's probably feeling suicidal here. So is this really fair for Joseph Smith to put this burden on this 15 or 16-year-old? Another interesting fact, when you go to Brian Hale's site for Lucy Walker that I mentioned previously, he never mentions the age of Lucy. This is what apologists do. All right, same account continues here. Oh, that the grave would kindly receive me. This is what Lucy is saying. That I might find rest on the bosom of my dear mother. So she basically saying, I want to die. I want to be with my mother who's dead. Why should I be chosen from among thy daughters, Father? I am only a child in years and experience. Very good questions that Lucy is asking here. She was no dummy. She was a pretty smart woman. She's asking God, why are you choosing me to participate in this plural marriage or this polygamy? I'm only a child in years. She's only 15 or 16. Okay, so she continues. No mother to counsel, no father near to tell me what to do in this trying hour. Right, mother is dead, can't counsel with her. Father is not around. He was sent on a mission, probably by Joseph Smith. Oh, let this bitter cup pass. And thus I prayed in the agony of my soul. All right, so Joseph Smith did not sweeten the deal when he said after they got married, he would not be able to acknowledge her as his wife. This whole thing would have to be done in secret. And then someday, when they went to the Rocky Mountains, she would be honored as his wife. Someday. Of course, that never happened because he got killed. So according to her account, Joseph Smith said, although I cannot, under existing circumstances, acknowledge you as my wife, the time is near when we will go beyond the Rocky Mountains, and then you will be acknowledged and honored as my wife. That never happened. So is he kind of making a prophecy here that never happened? Was he unaware that he was going to die? But yeah, this is not a good deal for somebody. We're going to keep this secret. I can't acknowledge you as my wife. This sounds more like adultery, right? All right, we also have a deposition from Lucy Walker when she was called to testify in the Temple Lot case. We have a Temple Lot transcript. This is the abstract book that the RLDS Church put out. There's also like a 3-volume set of books that has the entire Temple Lot case, which I was able to get as well to make this video. Temple Lot case happening around 1893 here. Again, Lucy is saying that the marriage was not to be made public. She did not attend church with the prophet as his wife, and basically nobody knew that they were married. Not a good situation for these wives, for these young girls. All right, so she answers a question here in this case. She says, I cannot name a single solitary man, either an apostle in the church or any other man or woman now living, to whom I was introduced by Joseph Smith as his wife. There is not a single solitary individual living, whether in or out of the church, or who was a member of the church at the time of Joseph Smith's death, to whom he ever introduced me as his wife. So she's basically saying here that he never introduced me as a wife to anybody, not even the leaders of the church. There's another statement that we have that we'll get to that says he did mention it, or he did tell a few of the higher leaders of the church that he was married to her. So that's a bit of a conflicting account. But in this account, she basically said he told nobody. The marriage was not made public, and we didn't go to church together as wife. But they were still having sex, which we'll get to in a bit. All right, so going back to her main account here from the Lyman Omer Littlefield book, or like I said, many copies of this in the Church History Library. He, Joseph Smith, also said, this principle will yet be believed in and practiced by the righteous. It's polygamy. I have no flattering words to offer you. It is a command of God to you. No pressure, right? This is just what the most powerful being in the universe wants you to do. No pressure. I will give you until tomorrow to decide this matter. So here he gives her an ultimatum. He tried earlier, like a few months earlier, to get this all to happen. It didn't happen. Now he's saying it's a command of God the second time around, and I will give you tomorrow to decide this matter. Right? Giving her an ultimatum, putting the pressure on, turning the screws. If you reject this message, the gate will be closed forever against you. What is this gate being closed? What is he talking about? The gates of heaven? That's how I interpret it. Basically going back to that idea of salvation. You're not going to be saved. Maybe your family's not going to be saved. At least you're not going to be in the highest of the high kingdoms, right? But if you do become my wife, if you accept polygamy, the gates of heaven will be open to you. And we're going to get to some other people's interpretation of that as well. All right, so we have an interpretation from the polygamy scholar George D. Smith about what is meant about these gates being closed. This is from an article entitled Nauvoo Roots of Mormon Polygamy, which came out in Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought in 1994. He says, a charismatic, handsome man, Joseph Smith apparently had little trouble persuading young women that he was their way to eternal realms of glory. Joseph Smith was their way to eternal realms of glory. Lucy Walker was angry and insulted, but she feared Joseph Smith's warning that if she rejected the principle of plural marriage, the gate will be closed forever against you. So George D. Smith is interpreting this as Joseph Smith and this holy practice of plural marriage is their way to eternal realms of glory. It's basically going back to that idea of salvation. Do it, you'll be saved, your family will be saved. And don't do it, the gates of heaven will be eternally closed against you. And here we have pictured above the gates going into heaven. All right, we basically have the same interpretation by a D.J. Gonzalez in his book, The Wide Divide, came out in 2017. He says, so bearing the burden of Lucy Walker's own eternal salvation and also that of her family, as she was deceitfully taught by the prophet and then faced with an ultimatum, Lucy married Joseph Smith on May 1st, 1843. That's the first time we have the date and the first time that we said, yep. She eventually went through with it, eventually married Joseph Smith. This happened on May 1st, 1843. We have an affidavit for that date. And so Lucy Walker bared the burden of her own eternal salvation and that of her family. So, again, another person with the same interpretation. Of course, people like Brian Hales are going to twist this and spin this into something else. All right, we have the same interpretation here from some journalists, Richard and Joan Ostling. They wrote the book Mormon America, which came out in 2007. They both say that Joseph Smith threatened Lucy with damnation and that his pressure amounted to spiritual coercion, or you could call that undue influence. All right, we basically have the same interpretation from the Mormon scholar Grant H. Palmer, rest in peace. This is from his book Restoring Christ, which came out in 2017. He, Joseph Smith, told Lucy Walker that rejecting his offer would bring eternal damnation. So we got a lot of good sources for this interpretation. Okay, so Lucy continues. I felt at this moment that I was called to place myself upon the altar a living sacrifice. Give up her life as a sacrifice, basically, for this principle. All my dreams of happiness blown to the four winds. This was too much. I had been speechless, but at last found utterance and said, although you are a prophet of God, you could not induce me to take a step of so great importance unless I knew that God approved my course. All right, she continues. I would rather die. I have tried to pray, but receive no comfort, no light, and emphatically forbid Joseph Smith speaking again to me on this subject. Every feeling of my soul revolted against it. So again, she's feeling suicidal, feeling like she'd rather die than have to marry this old guy. Okay, Joseph Smith walked across the room, returned and stood before me with the most beautiful expression of countenance, and said, God Almighty bless you. You shall have a manifestation of the will of God concerning you, a testimony that you can never deny. I will tell you what it shall be. It shall be joy and peace that you never knew. Okay, Joseph Smith led me to a chair, placed his hands upon my head, and blessed me with every blessing that my heart could possibly desire. Does that include salvation as well? All right, so we know that Lucy Walker was living in the mansion house with Joseph Smith and Emma and some other polygamous wives as well. She was basically a maid. She would help take care of the children, probably helped with some of the cooking and cleaning. This is from a Judge D.H. Morris statement from Lucy. This can be found in the Vesta P. Crawford collection in the University of Utah. So I, Lucy, went to live with Joseph Smith's family as a maid. This is in the mansion house. And after I had grown up, which is only ages 15 to 16, this is supposedly grown up, ages 15 to 16. After she had grown up, Joseph Smith asked me if I would marry him. I felt highly insulted. Okay, Todd Compton has an account here from Joseph Smith III. That is Emma and Joseph Smith's son. He went on to be the prophet of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith III reported that Lucy served as one of Emma's maids, working for her board, that's room and board, and going to school. Lucy used to marshal us children to and from school, as would an elder sister. So she's kind of working in the home. I don't think she did that much work, but she did some. And she's kind of living there as an adopted child of Emma and Joseph. All right, so Todd Compton continues. Lucy Walker was another young wife of Joseph Smith. He proposed to her when she was 15 or 16. In her story, we find the familiar pattern of the teenage girl living in the Mormon leader's house, whom Joseph Smith then approaches and marries. So this is a pattern. There's several other young teenage girls living in his house that he also marries. I'll mention some of those on an upcoming slide. So this is a pattern, marrying people, these teenage girls that were in his home. It's also a pattern that Joseph would send men on missions and then approach their wives, approach their daughters. And they wouldn't be in the mix to stop him. All right, so Fawn Brody talks about this as well in her book, No Man Knows My History, and she gives the names of some of these brides living in Joseph Smith's home. So she says 6 of the girls that Joseph took as wives lived at various times as wards in his own home, kind of like foster daughters. These were the Partridge sisters, the Lawrence sisters, Eliza R. Snow, and Lucy Walker. And pictured above, we have a picture of older Eliza Partridge and younger Eliza Partridge. That looks like a real picture of her being younger, but I'm not sure. It could be software. Okay, let's go to the Lucy Walker Affidavit, dated December 17, 1902. This affidavit is basically just saying, yes, I did marry Joseph Smith for time and eternity. Okay, so Lucy Walker Smith Kimball, being being first duly sworn. Walker was her maiden name. Smith is the name she got from marrying Joseph Smith. Kimball's the name she got from marrying Heber C. Kimball, who married her after Joseph Smith passed away. So she has this very long name, as do a lot of polygamous wives. Lucy Walker Smith Kimball, although in the Utah era she went by the name Lucy Kimball. First being duly sworn says, I was a plural wife of the prophet Joseph Smith and was married for time and eternity in Nauvoo, state of Illinois, on the first day of May, 1843, by Elder William Clayton. It was Joseph Smith's secretary. He kept a lot of his journals, kept a lot of, wrote down a lot of the things that Joseph Smith wanted him to keep as his secretary. Interesting that it says she was married to Joseph Smith for time and eternity. Time is this earth. Time means that they're having sex, husband and wife on this earth in time, but she's also married to Joseph Smith for eternity. She was only married to Heber C. Kimball for time as well, and she was also having sex with Heber C. Kimball because we know that they had 9 kids. But she was married for time and eternity to Joseph Smith. That time part means she was having sex with Joseph Smith, and we'll get to some more specific statements showing that they were having sex. Okay, so she got married. Lucy had just turned 17 years old the day before they got married. So she was almost 16, just barely turned 17 the day before. This was probably on purpose to marry her when she's 17. Looks and sounds better, right, than 16. Joseph Smith was 37 years old when he married her, so it's a 20-year age difference. Kind of gross. Lucy was Joseph Smith's 23rd wife, and pictured above is a picture of William Clayton. All right, so William Clayton kept a journal, and he records this marriage in his journal. There's still quite a bit of his journals that haven't been released, according to my understanding. But some of them have. You can find them in the Journals of William Clayton, an intimate chronicle, edited by George D. Smith, president of Signature Books. So an entry in his journal on May 1st, 1843, which was a Monday. This was the day they got married. In the morning at the temple, I guess he was at the temple in the morning. At 10 a.m., I married Joseph to Lucy Walker. So there's another account of it. All right, so it's also interesting to note that Joseph Smith had not received the revelation in D&C 132 before he married Lucy Walker. Joseph Smith's revelation on polygamy in D&C section 132 did not occur until July 12, 1843. That's when he got that revelation. He married Lucy Walker a couple months before this, and apparently, like 22 other women and girls as well before he had received this revelation that he should be marrying these women and girls. So this is a little suspect. You can find this this date of this revelation in the heading in your scriptures in D&C 132. All right, some more information about Lucy Walker keeping the marriage a secret, and Joseph Smith keeping it a secret. This is the Lucy Walker deposition in the Temple Lot case transcript. This is the abstract of the case. Came out in 1893. So they asked Lucy the question, Emma Smith was not present at the wedding, and she did not consent to the marriage. She did not know anything about it at all. So this is all a question, that they're asking her at this Temple Lot case. Basically asking, was Emma Smith present? Did she consent to the marriage? Did she know anything about it? And Lucy Walker's answer is, no, sir. She, Emma, did not know anything about my marriage to her husband. And pictured above, we have a picture of Emma that most people probably haven't seen. All right, we have another source that confirms this as well. This is research done by Todd Compton in a letter to the editor of the Journal of Mormon History, fall of 1999. If you haven't read any of the Journal of Mormon History, they have some really good articles in there. I would say Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought is the best. Journal of Mormon History, probably next best. They have both Mormon and non-Mormon writers and scholars in there. But anyway, we have this other source. In May 1945, a Nicholas G. Smith, he was the assistant to the 12 apostles and also a son of the apostle John Henry Smith. He's pictured above. Nicholas G. Smith recorded that he had heard from his mother-in-law, Tirzah Farr Gay, that Lucy Walker was a hired girl in the home of the prophet and was married to the prophet without Emma knowing it. So again, we have another source for this. Lucy married the prophet without Emma knowing it. All right, another interesting tidbit is that Joseph Smith married Lucy when Emma Smith was out of town. Emma, his wife, was out of town. She was in St. Louis, Missouri, getting supplies. Very convenient timing, right? One source for this is Newell and Avery's book, Mormon Enigma, Emma Hale Smith. Excellent book. In there it says, Joseph Smith married 17-year-old Lucy Walker while Emma Smith was in St. Louis, Missouri. Convenient, right? Barely turned 17 the day before. Emma's not in the mansion house. Can marry her, have sex with her that night. Emma would return, I believe, the next day. All right, so let's look at this chronology here. It's kind of interesting for May 1st and May 2nd, 1843. Joseph Smith was actually courting another girl right before Emma was coming home from St. Louis. This can be found in Richard Van Wagner's book, Mormon Polygamy, which came out in 1986. He says, the next morning prior to Emma's afternoon arrival at the steamboat landing, William Clayton noted that Joseph Smith had spent the morning riding with 16-year-old Flora Woodworth, an activity which was probably noticed by others as well. So he gets married to Lucy Walker the day before. The next morning, he's out riding with another 16-year-old Flora Woodworth. And we'll show on another slide, he eventually married her too. All right, so here's the actual entry from William Clayton in his journal. May 2nd, 1843, day after he marries Lucy, Joseph Smith rode out today with Flora Woodworth, 16-year-old girl. So he's making good use of his time before Emma comes back later in the day. All right, so how do we know that he eventually married Flora Woodworth? Well, we have a statement from William Clayton, Salt Lake City, February 16, 1874, in church historian Andrew Jensen's The Historical Record, Volume 6. In there it says, during this period, which was from May to July of 1843, the prophet Joseph Smith took several wives. Amongst the number that I well remember was Flora Woodworth. So again, according to William Clayton, one of the people closest to Joseph Smith, during this time period, May to July of 1843, Joseph Smith also took Flora Woodworth, 16-year-old, as a wife. All right, so how do we know when Emma returned from St. Louis, Missouri? Well, Joseph Smith recorded it in his journal. You can find this in the josephsmithpapers.org project online. So an entry in his journal, May 2nd, 1843, this is the day after he marries Lucy. Joseph Smith rode out in the forenoon about 3 p.m. So in the morning, he's riding with Flora. 3 p.m., he rides out to the Maid of Iowa. I guess that's a boat. Which arrived from St. Louis, Missouri. I was on the bank of the river awaiting the arrival of my wife, Emma, who returned with Loren Walker. Loren Walker was Lucy's brother. So it's interesting. Emma's off getting supplies with Lucy's brother, Loren Walker. So we know that Emma wasn't in town for this marriage to Lucy. We know she wasn't in town yet when he's out riding with Flora. All right, statement here in George D. Smith's book, Nauvoo Polygamy, but we called it Celestial Marriage. Cover of it is on the left up here, George on the right. This kind of contradicts another account that we have about Joseph Smith introducing Lucy to any of the brethren, any of the general authorities. This account says that Joseph did introduce Lucy to Heber Kimball, Hiram Smith, and Brigham Young as his wife. So maybe that happened. Lucy contradicts this in another account, I believe, in the Temple Lot case. But maybe Joseph introduces her, or at least tells some of these other men that are in his inner circle about this. Although not generally acknowledged, there was a few who knew it. Not sure who's saying that. She went by her own name, Lucy Walker, and the Lawrence girls went by their maiden names as well. So she didn't take Joseph Smith's name. She just went by her maiden name, Lucy Walker. Same as the Lawrence girls, who were also living in his house as his wards, as Von Brody said. All right, another interesting tidbit of information is that just 10 days after he marries Lucy, he marries another woman, another girl, Sarah Lawrence, and maybe her sister, Maria. So Joseph is very active during this time with polygamy. Just 10 days later, he's marrying another one. This is also in George D. Smith's book, Nauvoo Polygamy. On May 11, 1843, only a few days after the Lucy Walker marriage, Joseph Smith married 16-year-old Sarah Lawrence. So also another very young bride. She's living in the mansion house as well. It may also have been the same day that he married Sarah's 19-year-old sister, Maria. So Joseph Smith very active at this time. All right, so we know that Joseph Smith married at least 4 different women or girls in this month of May 1843. Lucy was one of them. This can be found in M.R. Werner's book, Brigham Young, came out in 1925. He says, in that month of May 1843, the prophet Joseph Smith added 4 wives. All of the 4 were less than 20 years of age. They're all teenagers, I guess. One of these wives was 14-year-old Helen Kimball. She was the youngest of all of Joseph Smith's wives, only 14. Sarah Lawrence, 16. Lucy Walker, basically 16. Barely turned 17. All right, so let's get to the question of whether or not Joseph Smith had sex with Lucy Walker. We have some evidence in the Temple Lot case. Lucy Walker gave a deposition in the case. There's a 3-volume set of books that has all the transcripts, which I have now. They're kind of hard to go through and hard to search through because they're so faint. Somebody should really make a good type script of that someday. Anyway, you can see the page numbers and the question numbers here in the source. First question they asked her, did you live with Joseph Smith as his wife? Answer, he was my husband, sir. So that's kind of insinuating there that they were living together as husband and wife. What do husbands and wives do? Well, they have sex with each other. Question, how many children did you have by virtue of your marriage with Joseph Smith? Answer, I decline to answer the question, sir. Question, did you have any? And he's talking about children. I decline to answer the question. Question, have you any children by Joseph Smith? Answer, I decline to answer the question. Question, why do you decline to answer it? Why do you decline to answer this question? Answer, well, I think that is my business and none of yours. So it's kind of interesting. If they didn't have any kids, maybe she wouldn't decline to answer. If they did have kids, maybe she's hesitant to talk about it. We don't really know. There is some evidence that some of Joseph Smith's wives were getting abortions. Sidney Rigdon talked about that. John C. Bennett has talked about that. I've talked about that in other videos. So it's interesting. But so far we have no physical or DNA evidence that Joseph Smith ever had any children with his polygamous wives. Okay, so Lucy Walker's deposition testimony continues. Question, now is it not a fact that you were just sealed to Joseph Smith for eternity? Answer, no, sir, it was for time and all eternity. Whenever they say time in these polygamous relationships, that means they're married as husband and wife in time. It means they're having sex in time on this earth. That's what husbands and wives do. The marriage was not just for eternity. Sometimes apologists say, well, these marriages are just for eternity. But we have evidence here in Lucy Walker's case that it was also for time. And it's interesting also that Brian Hales leaves this little tidbit out of his information on his webpage that we've mentioned before about Lucy Walker. Question, well, did you raise a child by Joseph Smith? Answer, I decline to answer the question. So she just doesn't want to answer the question about whether or not they had children. Okay, deposition continues. Question, did you ever occupy the same bed with him? And that is with Joseph Smith. Answer, I decline to answer the question. Question, you say that you will not answer any of these questions. Answer, I do, not on that subject. Question, did you ever see a child that you knew was Joseph Smith's outside of David, Alexander, Frederick, and Joseph? Answer, I decline to answer that question. So I guess David, Alexander, Frederick, and Joseph, those were the children of Joseph Smith and Emma. Question, why do you decline to answer the question or answer it? Well, it belongs to a secret part of my religion. So that's interesting. And that's what Joseph Smith taught her, that this relationship with her was secret. Don't mention it to anybody. Use your maiden name. Don't go to church with me. Someday maybe we can be openly married in the Rocky Mountains when we go to wherever we're going to go, Utah or wherever in the Rocky Mountains. It's also interesting that this last question and answer, why do you decline to answer it? Well, it belongs to a secret part of my religion. Brian Hales leaves that off of his website as well. All right, so the deposition continues. Question, you know that you did not have any children by him, Joseph Smith. Answer, well now that is something that I did not tell you anything about at all. It is none of your business if we had 20 sons or children. It is none of your business if we did not have any. So she's not going to answer this question. It looks to me as if she's been coached. She's probably been coached by the Mormon leaders, maybe some Mormon attorneys. This is in the 1890s, I believe, that this is going on. The church probably didn't want any of that information getting out. Pictured above, we have 5 of the sons, I believe, of Joseph and Emma. The guy down in the right-hand corner is Joseph Smith III, who went on to establish the RLDS church with Emma, his mother. Okay, we have another interesting account here from Lucy W. Kimball, or Lucy Walker, Kimball was her name when she married Heber C. Kimball. This can be found in Andrew Jensen, the church historian's Historical Record, Volume 6. Came out in 1887. And Lucy talks about in this account about Joseph Smith having sex with 4 of his other wives. So she obviously knew that he was having sex with some of the wives. So she says, Emma Smith was well aware that he, Joseph Smith, associated with these 4 of his wives within the meaning of all that word implies. So she's kind of euphemistically saying, yeah, Joseph Smith had sex with these 4 polygamous wives. He associated with them within the meaning of all that word implies. This is kind of how they talked in the 19th century. They weren't as open about sexuality as we are now. This is proven by the fact that she herself, Emma, on several occasions kept guard at the door to prevent disinterested persons from intruding when these ladies were in the house. That statement sounds like BS to me. That does not sound like Emma at all. Standing guard at the door while Joseph Smith is in some room with his polygamous wives. I don't think Emma would be doing that. Pictured above, we have Emma with one of her children. Okay, we have some evidence here from Martha S. Bradley Evans. She put out a book entitled Glorious in Persecution, Joseph Smith, American Prophet, 2016. Found this in a footnote. She says, on May 1st, 1843, Lucy Walker married Joseph Smith, an event that resulted in Lucy's ejection from the Smith home when Emma found out. Martha does not give a source for this. Not sure where she got this idea. I was not able to find any source anywhere for this statement, and I've looked pretty deeply at all the data, all the evidence. She may have been thinking about some other wife that was kicked out of the home, because I have heard of Emma kicking out other wives from the mansion house. So this account seems suspect to me. There really needs to be some kind of a source for it, not just Martha's word, but I still found it interesting enough to put in here. So yeah, we know that the marriage was kept secret from Emma in the early days. Martha's saying she eventually found out about it. Like I said, we need a source for this. Okay, we have some more interesting information in Joseph Smith III's journal. Entry on November 12th, or maybe the 18th. I guess it was illegible. 1876. In there, he talks about a Theodosia Frances Walker Davis, who was a niece of Lucy Walker's, who asserted in 1876 that a Miss Davis, who was the daughter of William Walker was Lucy's brother, so a Miss Davis, daughter of William Walker at Salt Lake, she says that Lucy Walker told her that she lived with Joseph Smith as a wife. So again, it's that same kind of language. Joseph Smith, Lucy Walker living together as husband and wife. Pictured above is Joseph Smith III. Okay, a statement from Angus Cannon, brother of George Q. Cannon. I believe he is pictured above there. Statement reporting an interview with Joseph Smith III in 1905. Angus Cannon stated that concerning the lack of offspring born to the prophet's plural wives, all I knew was that which Lucy Walker herself contends. They were so nervous and lived in constant fear that they could not conceive. I guess Lucy Walker tells Angus this. They were living in a lot of fear, and they were nervous. So somehow that fear and nervous made it so they couldn't conceive a baby. That doesn't really make sense to me, but it still kind of insinuates that they were having sex. All right, a statement here from D.H. Morris, Untitled Typed Statement, June 12th, 1930. An acquaintance of Lucy was D.H. Morris. He quoted her saying, "I married Joseph Smith as a plural wife and lived and cohabited with him as such." That word cohabiting is a word that also implies that they were having sex. Okay, this is how D. Michael Quinn put it. He did a paper, I believe in response to Brian Hale's, entitled Evidence for the Sexual Side of Joseph Smith's Polygamy in 2013. Quinn is pictured above. Rest in peace. He just died recently, unfortunately. He says, Lucy Walker stated that her own marriage to Joseph Smith involved sex while she was his 17-year-old bride. That's pretty direct. And I found kind of a hilarious, ridiculous statement from Richard L. Bushman in his book, Rough Stone Rolling. This is kind of hilarious in my opinion. He says, like Abraham of old, Joseph Smith yearned for familial plenitude. He yearned to have this big family. Joseph Smith did not lust for women so much as he lusted for kin. He wanted to have this big, huge family and extending this family. Well, he came from a large family. He had a lot of associations and friends in the church. He was a Mason, probably had Mason friends. So I'm not sure why Bushman says this. I think he's just doing some apologetics here. Joseph did not lust for women so much as he lusted for kin. Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that Joseph Smith had a high libido. I think it's pretty safe to say he had sex with Lucy Walker and a number of his other polygamous wives. And even Brian Hales admits that he has had sex with some of them. All right, so the prophet Joseph Smith dies on June 27, 1844. He was 38 years old. Gets shot down by an angry mob at Carthage Jail in Illinois. So, of course, this dissolves the marriage with Lucy. Lucy is single for around 7 months and then marries Heber C. Kimball. All right, so here is the affidavit from Lucy about her getting married to Heber C. Kimball. December 17, 1902 affidavit. She says, on the 8th day of February 1845, it's about 7 months after Joseph had died, I was married for time to President Heber C. Kimball. Only for time, not for eternity, because she was married to Joseph for eternity. Heber C. Kimball sounds like he was in the first presidency at this time. So I married him and bore to him 9 children. So we know they're having sex at least 9 times. Married for time. Lucy was 18 years old and Heber C. Kimball was 43 years old. So what is that? About 25-year age difference, even more of a difference than with Joseph Smith. So yeah, that's that. Heber is pictured above. All right, some more information from Todd Compton in Sacred Loneliness book. He's pictured above. He says Lucy in 1893 testified publicly, probably the Temple Lot case again. She said, there was not any love in the union between myself and Heber C. Kimball, and it is my business entirely whether there was any courtship or not. No love with Heber, maybe not any courtship. They did have 9 kids together, so we know there was plenty of sex going on, at least 9 times. Married to Heber for time. She was married to Joseph for time, but she's only married to Joseph for eternity. Heber doesn't get to claim her in the next life. All right, some more information from Stanley B. Kimball in the book Heber C. Kimball, Mormon Patriarch and Pioneer, which came out in 1981. He's basically talking about how Lucy Walker had to support herself in the Utah years. I have heard that Heber C. Kimball was pretty poor and really didn't give a whole lot of support or money to all of his wives, and I believe he had a whole bunch. So in the book it says little is known about the financial support of Joseph Smith's widows. And some of them went to Heber. One, Lucy Walker, recorded that they all had to fend for themselves to learn a trade. So I guess Lucy Walker was still working at the time to support herself, learning a trade. Heber C. Kimball maybe not able to offer much financial assistance like Brigham Young was doing with his wives. And we do have some pictures of Lucy Walker in her older days, and here is one of them. I think she was a pretty smart and well-spoken woman. All right, here's another picture of Lucy Walker in her older days. She lived until she was 84, so a nice long life, especially for the time period. Lucy died in 1910 in Salt Lake City as a faithful member of the church. She was one of the last remaining wives of Joseph Smith alive, and she would kind of go around to church meetings and talk about how she was married to Joseph Smith. She's one of the wives, one of the last ones. She would talk to leaders and members of the RLDS church saying, yes, there really was polygamy. I was really married to Joseph Smith, etc. And, you know, she was a believer in plural marriage until the day she died, as far as I know. Some of this information can be found on Brian Hale's site. And that is going to do it for this video. This was a deep dive. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I went through 90% of the data and information that is out there on Lucy Walker. It's a pretty easy one. There's really not a ton of information that when you search for Lucy Walker in different documents and online, there's really not a whole lot of accounts and documents. Most of the ones that we know of are in this video. But that's going to do it for this video. And I thank you for watching the Joseph Smith's Polygamy, the Lucy Walker Affair video. And here again we have a picture of Lucy Walker in her middle ages, it looks like, in one of her nicer dresses. That's going to do it, though. Thank you for watching.